The blizzard had come out of nowhere, turning the Arizona high country into a frozen wasteland that no one in Seligman had seen the likes of in 20 years. And Rebecca Carson stood banging on the locked boarding house door with frost-bitten fingers while the wind tore through her thin cotton dress like 1,000 knives. She had only stepped outside for a moment to fetch water from the pump, thinking she would be back inside before anyone noticed, but the door had swung shut behind her, and the latch had fallen into place. Mrs. Henderson, the boarding house keeper, had gone to visit her sister 3 miles out of town and would not be back until morning. The other boarders were all working late at the saloon or the general store. Rebecca pounded harder, her knuckles splitting and bleeding against the frozen wood, but there was no one to hear her cries over the howling wind. Her teeth chattered so violently she bit her tongue and tasted copper. The snow had started falling just after sunset, gentle at first, but within an hour it had transformed into a raging storm that buried the streets of Seligman under drifts that reached past her knees. She could barely see 3 feet in front of her face. The temperature had dropped so fast that icicles were already forming on the eaves above her head. Rebecca tried the door one more time, throwing her shoulder against it, but it would not budge. She was going to die out here in the snow, frozen solid like some forgotten statue, and no one would find her until morning when it was far too late. Her legs were going numb. She could not feel her feet anymore. The wet fabric of her dress clung to her skin, stealing what little warmth remained in her body. She sank down against the door, wrapping her arms around herself, trying to conserve heat that was already gone. Her vision was starting to blur. The wind screamed like a living thing, and she found herself thinking of her mother back in Philadelphia, wondering if she would ever know what happened to her daughter who had come west to make a new life. Rebecca had been in Seligman for only 3 months, working as a seamstress and saving every penny to open her own dress shop. She was 22 years old, and she was going to die alone in the snow. Through the white curtain of falling snow, she saw a shape moving toward her. At first she thought it was her mind playing tricks, the cold making her hallucinate, but the shape grew larger and more solid. A horse. A man on a horse, bent low against the wind, his hat pulled down over his face and his coat collar turned up. He was leading the animal by the reins, walking beside it rather than riding, as if he knew the footing was too treacherous to trust his weight to the horse's judgment. Rebecca tried to call out, but her voice was barely a whisper, stolen by the wind before it could travel more than a few inches. The man kept coming, though, his boots crunching through the snow, and when he was close enough she could see his face. Warren Kane. She knew him by sight. Everyone in Seligman knew Warren Kane, though she had never spoken more than a few words to him. He was a rancher who lived about 5 miles outside of town, a tall man in his mid-20s with dark hair and darker eyes, and a reputation for keeping to himself. He saw her huddled against the door, and his expression changed from determination to alarm. He dropped the horse's reins and covered the distance between them in 3 long strides, falling to his knees beside her in the snow. "Good God, what are you doing out here?" His voice was rough, harsh with concern. Rebecca's teeth chattered too hard for her to form words. She gestured weakly at the door behind her. Warren did not waste time asking more questions. He stood and examined the door, tried the handle, then took a step back. "Get clear," he said, and when Rebecca did not move fast enough, he bent and lifted her bodily, carrying her several feet away and setting her down as gently as he could in the snow. Then he turned back to the door, raised his boot, and kicked hard just beside the lock. The wood splintered but held. He kicked again, putting all his weight behind it, and this time the door flew open with a crack like a gunshot. Warren scooped Rebecca up again and carried her inside, kicking the broken door shut behind them as best he could to keep out the wind. The boarding house was dark and cold, but it was shelter. He set her down in the parlor and immediately began stripping off his heavy coat. "We need to get you warm," he said, wrapping the coat around her shoulders. It was still warm from his body heat and smelled of leather and wood smoke and horses. "Where is your room?" "Upstairs," Rebecca managed through chattering teeth. "Second door on the right." Warren did not hesitate. He picked her up again, coat and all, and carried her up the narrow staircase. She was too cold and exhausted to protest, too grateful to be alive to care about propriety. He shouldered open the door to her small room and set her down on the bed, then went immediately to the small stove in the corner. "You have kindling." "Wood." Rebecca pointed to the box beside the stove. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold them steady. Warren had a fire going within minutes, feeding it carefully until the flames were strong and steady. Then he turned back to her, his expression serious. "You need to get out of those wet clothes. You will catch pneumonia if you do not." Rebecca nodded but could not make her fingers work well enough to unbutton her dress. Warren crossed the room and knelt in front of her, his movements efficient and impersonal as he began working the small buttons free. There was nothing improper in his touch, nothing that suggested anything other than the urgent need to save her life. When he had the dress open, he turned his back to give her privacy. "Can you manage the rest?" "I think so," Rebecca said, though she was not sure. Her fingers felt like blocks of ice. It took her several minutes, fumbling and clumsy, but she managed to peel off the wet dress and the soaked petticoats beneath. Her undergarments were damp but not soaked through. She pulled the quilt from her bed and wrapped it around herself. "All right," she said. Warren turned back around, his eyes carefully avoiding looking at her beyond what was necessary to assess her condition. He pulled the rocking chair close to the stove and guided her into it, wrapping the quilt more securely around her shoulders. Then he took her hands in his, rubbing them gently to restore circulation. His hands were warm and calloused, strong but surprisingly gentle. "What were you thinking?" he asked, and there was an edge to his voice now that the immediate crisis was passing. "Going outside in weather like this." "I did not know the door would lock behind me," Rebecca said defensively. "I was only going to be gone a moment, and the storm came on so fast. It was barely snowing when I went out." Warren shook his head but did not argue. He continued rubbing her hands, then moved to her feet, which were still icy cold. Rebecca gasped at the pain as sensation began returning to her toes. "I know it hurts," Warren said quietly, "but it is a good sign. Means nothing is frozen solid." They sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the howl of the wind outside. Gradually, warmth seeped back into Rebecca's body, though she could not stop shivering. Warren fetched another blanket from her trunk and layered it over the quilt. "What were you doing out in this storm?" Rebecca asked when she could finally speak without her teeth chattering. "You could have died yourself." "I was heading back to my ranch when the storm hit," Warren said. He had settled onto the floor beside her chair, his long legs stretched out toward the fire. "Got turned around in the snow and ended up back in town instead of heading away from it. Figured I would find a place to wait it out rather than try to make it home and freeze to death in a drift." "Lucky for you I did." "Lucky for me," Rebecca agreed. She looked at him more closely now that her vision was clearing. He had a strong profile, a straight nose and a firm jaw covered in a day or two worth of dark stubble. His hair was longer than was fashionable, curling slightly at his collar. There was something solid about him, dependable. "Thank you, you saved my life." Warren glanced up at her, his dark eyes meeting hers for a brief moment before sliding away. Anyone would have done the same. But it was you who did it, Rebecca said. So thank you. He nodded, accepting her gratitude with a quiet dignity. They fell silent again, listening to the storm rage outside. After a while, Warren spoke again. You are the seamstress, are you not? The one who came from back east a few months ago. Rebecca Carson, she said. Yes. I came from Philadelphia. Long way from home. I suppose it is, Rebecca said, but I wanted to make my own way. My father wanted me to marry a banker's son and settle into a respectable life of tea parties and charity committees. I wanted something more. And you found it in Seligman. There was a hint of amusement in Warren's voice. Rebecca smiled despite herself. I found possibility. That is more than I had back east. Warren nodded as if he understood. I came out here 5 years ago, he said. Bought land and built my ranch from nothing. It is not much yet, but it is mine. I know what you mean about wanting to make your own way. Where did you come from? Rebecca asked. She was warm enough now that the shivering had mostly stopped, though she kept the blankets wrapped tightly around herself. Kansas. My father had a farm there, but he had 6 sons and only one farm. I was the youngest. There was nothing for me to inherit, so I struck out on my own. Do you miss it? Kansas and your family? Warren was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. Sometimes. But I made my choice and I do not regret it. The land out here is harsh, but it is honest. You know where you stand. Either you can survive or you cannot. There is no pretending. Rebecca thought about that. She liked the way he spoke, direct and thoughtful, with no unnecessary words. There was something about Warren Kane that put her at ease despite the strangeness of the situation. The storm continued to howl outside, showing no signs of letting up. Warren added more wood to the fire and settled back against the wall, his eyes half closed. Rebecca realized he must be exhausted from fighting through the storm. You should rest, she said. There is another room across the hall. It belongs to Mr. Patterson, but he is away visiting family in Prescott. You could sleep there. Warren shook his head. I will stay here and keep the fire going. You need to stay warm. If you start shivering again in the night, you wake me. Rebecca wanted to protest that it was not proper for him to stay in her room, but the truth was she did not want to be alone. The cold had frightened her more than she wanted to admit, and having Warren there made her feel safe. She settled deeper into the chair, pulling the blankets up to her chin. Will your horse be all right? She asked. I put him in the lean-to behind the boarding house before I came up, Warren said. He has shelter from the worst of the wind. He will be fine until morning. Rebecca felt her eyes growing heavy. The warmth of the fire and the exhaustion from her ordeal were catching up with her. She tried to stay awake, feeling it would be rude to fall asleep while Warren kept watch, but her body had other ideas. When she woke, pale gray light was filtering through the window and the storm had finally stopped. The fire had burned down to embers, and Warren was nowhere to be seen. For a moment, Rebecca wondered if she had dreamed the whole thing, but then she saw his coat still draped over the back of the rocking chair and the broken door standing slightly ajar downstairs. She rose stiffly from the chair, every muscle in her body aching. Her dress from the night before was draped over a stand near the stove, dry now but wrinkled beyond repair. She dressed quickly in a fresh outfit, a sensible wool dress in deep green, and braided her dark hair back from her face. When she looked in the small mirror above her washstand, she saw that her face was pale and there were dark circles under her eyes, but otherwise she seemed to have suffered no permanent damage. Downstairs, she found Warren in the kitchen, trying to coax the big cast iron stove back to life. He had found coffee grounds and was setting a pot to boil. He turned when he heard her footsteps and gave her a quick, assessing look. How do you feel? Sore. Tired. Alive, Rebecca said. Thanks to you. Warren nodded and turned back to the stove. Coffee should be ready soon. Rebecca crossed to the window and looked out at the transformed landscape. Snow covered everything, pristine and white and impossibly deep. The drifts reached halfway up the buildings in some places. The street was completely impassable. She could not see any tracks or any sign that anyone else in town was stirring yet. "I have never seen snow like this," she said quietly. "Not even in Philadelphia." "It is rare this far south," Warren agreed. He poured 2 cups of coffee and handed her one. "But we are high up here. Sometimes winter comes hard to the high country." They drank their coffee in comfortable silence. Rebecca found herself studying Warren when she thought he was not looking. In the gray morning light, she could see the lines around his eyes, the sun-weathered skin of someone who spent most of his time outdoors. There was something appealing about his quiet competence, the way he simply did what needed doing without fuss or expectation of praise. "I should try to make it back to my ranch," Warren said after he had finished his coffee. "The animals will need tending, and I have a hired hand who is probably worried." "Can you make it through this snow?" Rebecca asked, worry creeping into her voice. "I will have to try. But I will need to fix that door before I leave. Cannot have it standing open in this cold." Warren spent the next hour repairing the boarding house door as best he could with the tools he found in Mrs. Henderson's shed. He reinforced the broken frame and rehung it so it would close properly, though the lock itself was beyond saving. When he was finished, he collected his coat and his hat and prepared to leave. Rebecca stood in the doorway, feeling oddly reluctant to see him go. "Will you be all right out there?" "I have been through worse," Warren said. He hesitated, then added, "You take care of yourself, Miss Carson. Stay warm." "Rebecca," she said. "Please, just Rebecca." "Rebecca," he repeated, and the way he said her name made something flutter in her chest. "I am Warren. Warren Kane." "I know," she said, and then felt foolish for admitting it. Warren smiled slightly, the first real smile she had seen from him. It transformed his face, making him look younger and less severe. "I suppose most people in Seligman know who everyone else is. Not much privacy in a small town." "Not much," Rebecca agreed. She wrapped her arms around herself against the cold air coming through the open door. "Thank you again, Warren, for everything." He touched the brim of his hat in farewell, then headed out into the snow, leading his horse behind him. Rebecca watched until he disappeared around the corner, swallowed up by the white landscape. Then she closed the door and leaned against it, feeling suddenly very alone. Over the next few days, as Seligman dug itself out from under the unprecedented snowfall, Rebecca found herself thinking about Warren Kane far more than was probably wise. She went about her work at the dress shop she had recently opened on Main Street, taking measurements and pinning hems and threading her needle with steady precision, but her mind kept drifting back to that night in the storm. The way he had carried her without hesitation. The gentleness in his rough hands as he warmed her frozen fingers. The quiet strength that radiated from him like heat from a stove. She told herself she was being ridiculous. She had spoken to the man for only a few hours under extraordinary circumstances. That did not mean anything. People acted differently in emergencies. It did not mean he had any interest in her beyond basic human decency. But then, 2 weeks after the storm, the bell above her shop door chimed and Warren walked in. He looked uncomfortable in the feminine space with its bolts of fabric and dress forms and the lingering scent of lavender sachets. He held his hat in his hands and shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "Warren," Rebecca said, surprised, "what brings you to town?" "I needed some supplies," he said, "and I wanted to check on you, make sure you recovered all right from your ordeal." "I am perfectly fine," Rebecca assured him, feeling warmth creep into her cheeks. Not even a sniffle. You got me inside just in time." Warren nodded, looking relieved. An awkward silence stretched between them. Finally, he said, "I also need a favor if you have the time. I tore my good shirt on a fence post and I am no hand with a needle. I was wondering if you might be able to repair it." Rebecca smiled. "Of course. That is what I do. Do you have it with you?" Warren produced the shirt from under his arm, wrapped in brown paper. Rebecca took it and examined the tear, which ran along the shoulder seam. It was a clean rip and would be easy enough to fix. "I can have this ready for you by tomorrow afternoon," she said. "I appreciate it," Warren said. He named a price that was more than fair, and Rebecca nodded her agreement. He seemed reluctant to leave, lingering by the door. "Have you had any more trouble with that door at the boarding house?" "No, your repair held perfectly, though Mrs. Henderson was quite shocked when she came home and found it broken. I had to explain what happened. I hope she was not angry. She was more concerned that I had nearly frozen to death. She felt terrible for leaving me alone. I assured her it was not her fault." Rebecca set the shirt aside on her work table. "Would you like some tea? I was just about to put the kettle on." Warren looked surprised by the offer, but he nodded. "That would be nice." Rebecca busied herself with the tea, grateful for something to do with her hands. Her small shop had a back room where she did most of her work, with a chair for clients and a small stove for heating water and keeping warm during the winter months. She gestured for Warren to take the chair while she perched on her work stool. "How is your ranch?" she asked as she poured the tea. "Did you lose any animals in the storm?" "I lost 2 head of cattle that got separated from the herd, but overall I was lucky. My hired hand, Tom, kept everything together while I was stuck in town. He is a good man." They talked about inconsequential things, the weather and the town gossip and the challenges of making a living in the harsh Arizona territory. Rebecca found that Warren was easy to talk to once he relaxed a bit. He had a dry sense of humor and a way of looking at the world that she appreciated. He did not talk down to her or treat her like she was fragile, the way so many men did. He spoke to her as an equal. Before she realized it, an hour had passed and other customers were starting to arrive. Warren stood to leave, thanking her for the tea. "I will be back tomorrow for the shirt," he said. "I will have it ready," Rebecca promised. He came back the next day and the day after that with a different errand, a button that needed replacing. Then a week later with torn trousers. Rebecca began to suspect that Warren Kane was finding excuses to visit her shop, and the realization made her heart race with a mixture of hope and anxiety. She was not looking for romance. She had come to Seligman to build a business and a life on her own terms. Getting involved with a man would complicate everything. But there was something about Warren that drew her, something beyond the debt of gratitude she owed him for saving her life. She liked the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. She liked his steady, calm presence. She liked the way he listened when she spoke, really listened, as if her words mattered to him. One afternoon in early March, when the snow had finally melted and the first hints of spring were appearing in the high desert, Warren arrived at her shop near closing time. Rebecca was putting away her sewing supplies when he walked in. "I am not here for mending this time," he said without preamble. "I was wondering if you might like to have dinner with me. There is a new restaurant that opened up on 3rd Street. Nothing fancy, but they say the food is good." Rebecca's heart jumped into her throat. "Are you asking me to court you, Warren Kane?" "I suppose I am," Warren said. A faint color had crept into his cheeks, but he met her eyes steadily. "If you are amenable to the idea. I know I am just a rancher and you are a businesswoman with plans of your own, but I enjoy your company and I thought maybe you enjoyed mine." Rebecca felt a smile spreading across her face. "I would like that very much. Tomorrow evening, then. I could pick you up at the boarding house around 6. Tomorrow at 6, Rebecca agreed. Warren left looking pleased, and Rebecca closed up the shop in a daze. She felt like a girl again, giddy and nervous and excited all at once. She spent the next day in a state of distraction, nearly sewing her measuring tape to a hem and giving Mrs. Patterson the wrong change. Warren arrived precisely at 6, dressed in his best clothes with his hair still damp from washing. He offered her his arm and they walked together to the restaurant, making small talk about the weather and the state of the roads. But beneath the surface conversation, Rebecca could feel a current of anticipation, as if they were both waiting for something to begin. Dinner was pleasant and comfortable. They talked about their hopes and dreams, their pasts and their plans for the future. Warren told her about his vision for his ranch, how he wanted to build it into something substantial, a legacy. Rebecca told him about her dream of expanding her dress shop, maybe even opening a second location someday in Flagstaff or Prescott. You ever miss Philadelphia? Warren asked over dessert. Rebecca considered the question. I miss my mother sometimes, and there are things about city life that were easier, but I do not regret leaving. I like the freedom out here, the sense that I can be whoever I want to be. Back east, everything was already decided for me. Who I should marry, how I should live, what I should want. Here, I get to decide. I understand that, Warren said. My father could not understand why I would leave a sure thing, even if it was a small thing, to come out here and start from nothing. But I needed to prove to myself that I could do it. And have you? Rebecca asked. Proved it to yourself? Warren thought about that. I am getting there. The ranch is doing well enough. I am not rich, but I am making my way. Some years are harder than others, but that is the nature of ranching. You take the bad with the good. After dinner, Warren walked Rebecca back to the boarding house. They stood on the front step, that same step where she had nearly frozen to death just 2 months earlier, and the irony was not lost on either of them. I am glad you did not die that night, Warren said quietly. I am glad I got turned around in the storm and ended up where you needed me. So am I, Rebecca said. She reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. I know it is probably too soon to say this, but I feel like that storm brought us together for a reason. I feel the same way, Warren admitted. He squeezed her hand gently. I would like to see you again, as often as you will let me. I would like that too. They courted properly over the next several months, with Sunday drives in Warren's wagon and dinners at the restaurant, and stolen moments at her shop when business was slow. Warren was nothing if not respectful, always mindful of Rebecca's reputation and never pushing for more than she was willing to give. But the affection between them grew steadily, deepening from attraction into something more substantial. By summer, Rebecca knew she was in love with Warren Kane. She loved his quiet strength and his gentle humor. She loved the way he treated her as a partner and an equal. She loved the calluses on his hands and the way his eyes lit up when he talked about his ranch. She loved that he never tried to change her or make her into something she was not. One evening in late July, Warren took her out to his ranch for the first time. It was a long ride from town, through scrubland and past red rock formations that glowed in the setting sun. The ranch itself was modest but well kept, with a sturdy house built of adobe and wood, a barn and several outbuildings. Cattle grazed in the pastures and chickens scratched in the yard. This is it, Warren said, and Rebecca could hear the pride in his voice. This is what I have built. It is wonderful, Rebecca said honestly. She could see the care he had put into everything, from the neat fences to the vegetable garden beside the house. You should be proud. They sat on the porch as the sun set, drinking lemonade and watching the sky turn orange and purple and finally deep blue. Stars began to appear, more stars than Rebecca had ever seen in her life, sprinkled across the sky like diamonds on velvet. "I have been thinking," Warren said carefully, "about the future, about what I want my life to look like." Rebecca's heart began to beat faster. She turned to look at him, but he was staring out at the horizon. "I want to share this with someone," Warren continued. "I want to build something that matters, not just for myself, but for a family. For children someday. I want to come home at the end of a long day and have someone to talk to, someone who understands what I am trying to do here." He turned to face her then, and the intensity in his dark eyes took her breath away. "I want that person to be you, Rebecca. I know it has not been that long since we met. I know you have your own business and your own plans, but I love you. I have loved you since that night in the storm, I think, and I am asking if you might consider being my wife." Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes. "Warren, I have my shop. I have worked so hard to build it." "I know," Warren said quickly. "And I would never ask you to give that up. You could keep your shop in town. I know I cannot give you much yet, but I am doing well enough that you could hire someone to help you maybe, so you would not have to be there every day. Or you could sell the shop if you wanted, if you decided you would rather be at the ranch. Or keep it and travel back and forth. I just want you to know that I support whatever choice you make." "You would really be all right with me keeping my business?" Rebecca asked, hardly daring to believe it. "Rebecca, I fell in love with you because of who you are, not in spite of it. You are strong and independent and you know your own mind. Those are not things I want to change about you. Those are the things I love most." Rebecca felt the last of her resistance crumble. She had come west to make her own choices, to live life on her own terms. And now she was choosing this, choosing Warren, choosing love. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." Warren's face split into a wide grin and he pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. Rebecca could hear his heart pounding, as fast as her own. When he pulled back, he kissed her, a soft, gentle kiss that promised everything she had ever wanted. They were married in September, in a small ceremony at the church in Seligman with half the town in attendance. Rebecca wore a dress she had sewn herself, white silk with lace at the collar and cuffs, and she carried wildflowers that Warren had picked that morning. She had never felt more beautiful or more certain of anything in her life. The first months of marriage were an adjustment. Rebecca divided her time between the ranch and her shop, spending 3 days a week in town and 4 at the ranch. She had hired a young woman named Sarah to help with the simpler sewing jobs, which freed Rebecca up to focus on the more complicated orders and the business side of things. Life at the ranch was harder than she had anticipated, but also more rewarding. She learned to cook on the big iron stove, to tend the vegetable garden, to gather eggs from the chickens. Warren taught her to ride properly, and soon she was confident enough to help him check fence lines and move cattle. She fell in love with the land itself, the vast open spaces and the endless sky and the way the light changed throughout the day, painting the landscape in 1,000 different shades. She fell more deeply in love with Warren, too. Living with someone day in and day out revealed all the small quirks and habits that you could not know from courting. She learned that he sang to himself when he thought no one was listening, old songs from his childhood in Kansas. She learned that he was terrible at remembering to hang up his coat and would leave it draped over whatever chair was closest. She learned that he had nightmares sometimes about the ranch failing, about losing everything he had worked for, and she learned to wake him gently and hold him until the fear passed. Warren learned things about her too. That she was not a morning person and needed at least 1 cup of coffee before she could hold a conversation. That she hummed when she was concentrating on her sewing. That she had a temper when roused, though it burned hot and fast and was gone just as quickly. that she was fiercely loyal and would defend him and their life together against anyone who questioned her choices. They had their first real fight in November, over something stupid that Rebecca could not even remember later. It escalated faster than either of them intended, voices rising, words said in anger that they did not mean. Rebecca stormed out of the house and saddled her horse, riding off into the desert without any clear destination in mind. She just needed space, needed to cool down. She was gone for 2 hours, and by the time she returned, her anger had evaporated, replaced by worry about what she might find when she got back. But Warren was waiting for her in the yard, and the relief on his face when he saw her was so profound that Rebecca felt ashamed of herself. "I am sorry," she said, dismounting quickly. "I should not have ridden off like that. I just needed to think." "I am sorry too," Warren said. "I said things I did not mean. I was being stubborn." They stood there in the dusty yard, and then Warren opened his arms and Rebecca walked into them, holding him tight. "We are going to fight sometimes," Warren said into her hair. "That is just how it is when two people live together, but we always come back to each other. That is what matters." "Always," Rebecca agreed. As winter approached again, Rebecca found herself thinking about the year before, about that terrible night when she had nearly died in the snow. It seemed impossible that only a year had passed. Her entire life had changed. She had gone from being a single woman trying to make her way in the world to being a wife and a partner in building something meaningful. One morning in December, exactly 1 year after the storm, Rebecca woke feeling nauseous. She made it to the chamber pot just in time, and when she straightened up, she saw Warren standing in the doorway with a knowing look on his face. "Are you all right?" "I think so," Rebecca said weakly. "I think I might be pregnant." Warren's face transformed, joy and wonder and a touch of fear all mixing together. "Are you sure?" "Not completely, but I am fairly certain. I have been tired lately, and this is the 3rd morning in a row I have been sick." Warren crossed the room and knelt beside her, taking her hands. "How do you feel about it? Are you happy?" Rebecca thought about it. She had known that children were a possibility, had even looked forward to it eventually, but she had thought they would have more time. But looking at Warren's hopeful face, she found that she was happy, genuinely happy. "Yes," she said, "I am happy. Terrified, but happy." "Me too," Warren admitted. "I have no idea how to be a father." "And I have no idea how to be a mother," Rebecca said. "I suppose we will learn together." The pregnancy was not easy. Rebecca was sick for the first 3 months, barely able to keep anything down. She had to cut back on her time at the shop, which frustrated her, but Sarah proved capable of handling most of the day-to-day operations. As Rebecca's belly grew, she found herself spending more and more time at the ranch, too tired to make the trip to town more than once a week. Warren was endlessly patient with her moods and her discomfort. He took over more of the household chores without complaint, and he would rub her swollen feet at the end of the day. He talked to her belly, telling their unborn child about the ranch and the life they would have together. In June, after a long and difficult labor, Rebecca gave birth to a son. They named him William, and he had his father's dark hair and his mother's gray eyes. Warren held the baby with such tenderness and awe that Rebecca felt tears streaming down her face. "We made this," Warren said wonderingly. "We made a whole person." "We did," Rebecca agreed, exhausted but euphoric. Motherhood changed Rebecca in ways she had not expected. She loved William with a fierce, primal intensity that sometimes frightened her. She worried constantly about everything that could go wrong, every danger he might face. But she also felt a contentment she had never known before, a sense of completeness. She did not return to her shop after William was born. She had planned to, had told herself she would hire a nanny and go back to work after a few months, But when the time came, she found she could not do it. Sarah had been running the shop successfully on her own, and Rebecca realized that she was happy to let her. She sold Sarah the business for a fair price, with the understanding that Rebecca could still do special orders from home when she wanted to. Warren was surprised but pleased when she told him, "I thought your shop meant everything to you." "It did," Rebecca said, "but things change. I am still sewing, still creating. I am just doing it here now on my own terms, and this life, this family, means more to me than any business ever could." William grew into a bright, curious toddler who followed his father everywhere and got into everything. When he was 2, Rebecca got pregnant again, and this time she gave birth to a daughter they named Rose. 2 years after that, another son arrived, Robert, completing their family. The ranch prospered. Warren expanded his herd and bought more land. He built a larger house to accommodate their growing family, with separate bedrooms for the children and a big kitchen where Rebecca could cook and sew and watch her children play. They hired more help, a housekeeper named Maria who became like family, and 2 more ranch hands to help Warren with the increasing workload. Rebecca's days were full and busy, filled with the chaos and joy of raising 3 young children. She broke up fights and kissed scraped knees and told bedtime stories. She taught Rose to sew and William to ride. She helped with the ranch work when she could, though mostly she focused on managing the household and the children. But she and Warren always made time for each other. Once a month, Maria would watch the children, and they would take the wagon out to a spot overlooking the valley, bringing a picnic and a blanket. They would watch the sunset and talk about everything and nothing, reconnecting as a couple and not just as parents. "You ever regret it?" Warren asked her once as they lay on their backs watching the stars. "Giving up your shop, your independence?" Rebecca thought about it honestly. "Sometimes I miss it," she admitted. "I miss the satisfaction of completing a beautiful dress, of seeing a customer's face light up when they tried it on. But I did not give up my independence, Warren. I chose this life. I choose it every day, and I am happy." "I am happy too," Warren said, taking her hand. "Happier than I ever thought I could be. You gave me everything I did not even know I wanted." The years passed, marked by the changing seasons and the milestones of their children's lives. William started school in Seligman, riding into town each day on his pony. Rose showed early talent for drawing and painting. Robert was fearless and wild, always climbing trees and chasing after the ranch dogs. Rebecca and Warren grew older together, silver appearing in their hair, lines deepening around their eyes. But their love for each other only strengthened with time, tempered by the challenges they had faced together and sweetened by the life they had built. One winter evening, when the children were finally in bed and the house was quiet, Rebecca and Warren sat together on the porch despite the cold. It was the anniversary of the night they had met, 20 years earlier, and they had made it a tradition to mark the occasion by remembering. "I still think about that night," Warren said, pulling Rebecca close against his side. "How close I came to missing you entirely. If I had not gotten turned around in the storm, if I had decided to shelter somewhere else." "But you did not," Rebecca said. "You found me. You saved me." "We saved each other," Warren corrected gently. "I was so lonely before I met you, Rebecca. I had my ranch and I told myself that was enough, that I did not need anything else. But I was wrong. You showed me what it means to truly live, not just survive." Rebecca tilted her face up to kiss him, a kiss that held 20 years of love and partnership and shared history. When she pulled back, she smiled. "You remember what you said to me that first night? You said that the land out here is harsh but honest, that you know where you stand." "I remember. You were right. This life has been harsh sometimes, drought and disease and loss, but it has been honest. And I have always known where I stand, with you, always with you. Warren held her tighter, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. Inside the house, they could hear Robert calling out in his sleep, and Rose's quieter voice soothing him. The sounds of their family, the life they had created together. Rebecca thought back to the young woman she had been 20 years ago, standing in that snowstorm, convinced she was going to die. She had been so sure she knew what she wanted, so determined to make it on her own. And she had made it, just not in the way she had expected. She had found success not in building a business empire, but in building a family, a home, a partnership that had sustained her through everything life threw at them. She had come west looking for freedom and possibility, and she had found both. But she had also found love, the kind of love she had not even known existed. The kind of love that showed up in a snowstorm and broke down doors. The kind of love that lasted. Years continued to flow like water through their fingers, each one bringing its own joys and sorrows. William grew into a tall young man with his father's work ethic and his mother's stubborn determination. At 20, he announced he was going to California to try his luck in business. Rebecca cried as she helped him pack, proud and heartbroken in equal measure. Warren shook his son's hand and told him the ranch would always be there if he needed it. Rose fell in love at 17 with a schoolteacher who had come from Boston. She married him in the same church where Rebecca and Warren had wed, and they settled in Flagstaff where he taught at the new high school. She visited often, bringing her own children to the ranch for summers, where they ran wild just as she had done. Robert was the one who stayed. He had ranching in his blood, just like his father. At 18, he told Warren he had no desire to go anywhere else, that everything he wanted was right there on the land. Warren's pride was almost palpable, though he cautioned his youngest son to be sure, to see a bit of the world before committing his life to one place. But Robert was certain, and Warren began teaching him everything he knew about running the ranch. Rebecca's hair turned completely silver by the time she was 50, but her gray eyes remained sharp and clear. She was thinner than she had been in her youth, weathered by years of hard work and the harsh Arizona sun, but she moved with the same determination and grace. She had become something of a fixture in Seligman, the woman who had come from Philadelphia and made a life in the desert. Young brides often sought her out for advice, and she dispensed it honestly, never sugarcoating the difficulties of frontier life, but always emphasizing the rewards. Warren's body began to betray him as he aged. His knees ached from decades of hard riding, and his back troubled him on cold mornings. But he refused to slow down, still rising before dawn to check on the cattle, still riding fence lines and repairing equipment. Rebecca worried about him, but she knew better than to tell him to take it easy. The ranch was as much a part of Warren as his own heartbeat. Taking that away from him would be like asking him to stop breathing. One spring morning, when Rebecca was 53 and Warren was 56, she found him sitting on the porch steps, breathing hard, his hand pressed to his chest. Fear shot through her like lightning. "Warren, what is wrong?" "Just a pain," he said, but his face was pale and sweating. "Probably nothing." "It is not nothing," Rebecca said firmly. She called for Robert, who came running from the barn. Together they got Warren into the wagon and drove as fast as they dared into town to the doctor's office. The doctor examined Warren thoroughly and finally pronounced that his heart was strained. Too many years of hard work and stress. He needed to rest, to take it easy, or he risked a serious episode. Warren was furious. "I am a rancher. Rest is not something I can afford." "Then you cannot afford to live much longer," the doctor said bluntly. "Your choice, Mr. Kane. In the wagon on the way home, Warren was silent and brooding. Rebecca let him stew for a while before she spoke. "Robert can handle more of the work," she said quietly. "He is capable and he is ready. You have trained him well. Let him prove himself. The ranch is my responsibility." "The ranch is our family's legacy," Rebecca corrected, "and that means passing it on when the time comes. You do not have to give up everything, Warren, just delegate more. Let Robert take the lead on the day-to-day operations while you supervise. You will still be involved, but you will not be killing yourself." Warren looked at her, his dark eyes troubled. "I do not know how to stop." "I know," Rebecca said gently, taking his hand, "but you have to try." "Because I am not ready to lose you. I need more years with you, Warren Kane. I need to grow old with you. And I cannot do that if you work yourself to death." Something in her voice must have reached him, because he squeezed her hand and nodded. "All right, I will try." It was not easy for Warren to step back. He chafed at the restrictions, at having to watch Robert do work he had always done himself. But slowly, over months and then years, he learned to let go. He spent more time with Rebecca, taking those afternoon rides they had always treasured. He taught his grandchildren to ride when they visited. He read books he had never had time for before, sitting on the porch in the evening while Rebecca sewed beside him. And he discovered, somewhat to his surprise, that he did not miss the back-breaking work as much as he thought he would. He missed the feeling of being essential, of being needed. But Rebecca reminded him every day that he was both of those things, just in different ways. Rebecca herself slowed down as the years accumulated. Her hands developed arthritis that made sewing painful, though she refused to give it up entirely. She took longer to do tasks that had once been quick and easy. Her hearing began to fade, though she refused to admit it, making Warren repeat himself constantly until they both laughed about it. But her mind remained sharp, and her love for Warren never wavered. They had been married for over 30 years, and she loved him more at 55 than she had at 22. She loved him in a deeper, richer way, a love built on shared history and mutual respect, and the thousand small kindnesses they had exchanged over the decades. One evening in December, as they approached their 33rd anniversary of that fateful night in the storm, Rebecca and Warren bundled up against the cold and went out to sit on the porch. The stars were brilliant overhead, and the air was crisp and clean. "Do you know what I was thinking about today?" Rebecca asked, leaning against Warren's shoulder. "Tell me." "That young woman who nearly froze to death on Mrs. Henderson's doorstep. How terrified she was. How certain she was that her life was over." "She could not have known what was waiting for her," Warren said softly. "No," Rebecca agreed. "She could not have imagined any of this. The love, the family, the life we have built together, it has been so much better than anything I dreamed of when I came west. Even the hard parts." Warren asked. "Even the hard parts," Rebecca confirmed, "because we faced them together. That is what makes the difference. I never had to carry any burden alone." Warren kissed the top of her head. "I was thinking today about the man I was before I met you. So focused on proving myself, on building something from nothing. I told myself I did not need anyone else. But I was only half alive, Rebecca. You made me whole." They sat in companionable silence, holding hands like young lovers, watching their breath mist in the cold air. From inside the house, they could hear Robert and his new wife moving about, preparing dinner. The smell of cooking meat and fresh bread wafted out through the open window. "We should go inside," Warren said eventually. "You will catch cold out here." Rebecca laughed. "After everything we have survived, I think I can handle a little cold." But they went inside anyway, into the warm house filled with light and laughter and the promise of dinner. They sat at the table with Robert and his wife Emma, And they talked about the ranch and the coming year and all the plans they had. After dinner, Rebecca and Warren retired to their room, the same room they had shared for over 3 decades. Warren helped Rebecca with the buttons on her dress, a nightly ritual that had become second nature. She helped him with his boots, which his bad back made difficult to remove. They climbed into bed and lay facing each other, as they had done thousands of times before. Warren traced the lines of Rebecca's face with gentle fingers, memorizing features he knew as well as his own. "I love you," he said simply. "I have loved you from the moment I saw you huddled against that door, half frozen and terrified. I will love you until I draw my last breath and beyond." "I love you too," Rebecca whispered. "You are the best decision I ever made, Warren Kane, the very best." They fell asleep in each other's arms, and Rebecca's last thought before sleep claimed her was one of profound gratitude. Gratitude for the storm that had brought them together, for the door that had locked, for the cowboy who had broken through and saved her life in more ways than one. More years passed in a blur of seasons, each one blending into the next in the comfortable rhythm of a life well lived. Rebecca celebrated her 60th birthday, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. And Warren was there beside her, grayer and more bent than he had been, but still strong in the ways that mattered. They had weathered droughts and floods, financial hardships and personal losses, but they had weathered them together, and that had made all the difference. William came home from California for the celebration, successful and prosperous, but admitting that he missed the wide open spaces of Arizona. He talked about maybe retiring back to Seligman someday, bringing his business acumen to help expand the ranch into new ventures. Warren and Robert listened carefully, considering the possibilities. Rose arrived with her husband and 4 children, filling the house with noise and laughter. Her eldest daughter was already 15, a young woman in her own right, and she reminded Rebecca so much of herself at that age that it was almost painful. Full of dreams and determination, ready to take on the world. Robert and Emma had given them 2 more grandchildren by then, and they all lived together in the big house, 3 generations under one roof. It was chaotic and loud and sometimes frustrating, but it was also full of life and love, exactly what Rebecca and Warren had hoped for when they had first started building their family. At the birthday dinner, William stood to give a toast. "To my mother," he said, raising his glass, "who came west with nothing but determination and a dream, who survived a blizzard that should have killed her, who built a life and a family that will endure long after we are all gone. You taught us that love is not just a feeling but a choice, one you make every single day. Thank you for choosing us. Thank you for choosing this life." Rebecca had tears streaming down her face by the time he finished. She looked around the table at all the faces, young and old, and she felt overwhelmed by the richness of her life. She had come so far from that terrified young woman locked outside in the snow. She had become someone she never could have imagined back then, someone stronger and braver and fuller. Warren squeezed her hand under the table, and when she looked at him, she saw tears in his eyes too. They had built this together, this legacy of love and family. And it would continue long after they were gone, through their children and their children's children, rippling out into the future like water from a stone thrown into a still pond. That night, after everyone had gone to bed and the house was finally quiet, Rebecca and Warren took one last walk around the ranch. The moon was full and bright, illuminating the landscape in silver light. They walked slowly, arm in arm, their steps careful on the uneven ground. "Do you remember the first time I brought you out here?" Warren asked. "How nervous I was that you would not like it." "I remember thinking it was the most beautiful place I had ever seen," Rebecca said. "I still think that. This land, this life, it gets into your bones. It becomes part of who you are. They stopped at the spot where they used to come for their monthly picnics, before the children and grandchildren and the demands of age made such excursions difficult. The valley stretched out below them, vast and dark and infinite. "I think I am ready," Warren said quietly. Rebecca looked at him sharply. "Ready for what?" "To let go." "Not immediately, but eventually. I have fought so hard to hold on, to keep going, to not give in to age and illness. But I am tired, Rebecca, and I think that is all right. I think I have earned the right to be tired." Rebecca felt fear grip her heart, but she pushed it down. Warren was not talking about giving up on life, but about accepting its natural progression, about finding peace with the inevitability of endings. "You have earned that and more," she said softly. "But you are not allowed to leave me yet. We still have time. I can feel it." "I know," Warren said. "I am not going anywhere today or tomorrow, but when the time comes, I need you to let me go. I need you to know that I have had a good life, a better life than I ever dared hope for. You gave me that, Rebecca, you and our family." "You gave it to me too," Rebecca said, her voice breaking. "We gave it to each other." They stood there in the moonlight, two old people who had loved each other through everything life could throw at them, and they held each other as tightly as their aged bodies would allow. Rebecca memorized the feel of him, the smell of him, the sound of his breathing. She stored it all away like treasure, knowing that someday these memories would be all she had left. But that day was not today. Today they were still together, still breathing the same air, still watching the same stars. And that would have to be enough. 5 more years passed, years marked by the gradual dimming of Warren's vitality. He grew frailer, spending more time in bed, less time able to walk the land he loved. His heart condition worsened despite the doctor's best efforts, but his mind remained clear, and his love for Rebecca never wavered. Rebecca rarely left his side during those final years. She read to him, told him stories about the grandchildren, held his hand through the bad nights when pain kept him awake. She grieved for him even as he still lived, mourning the loss of the strong, vital man he had been while cherishing the man he still was. On a cold December morning, exactly 40 years after the night they had met, Warren woke with the sunrise and asked Rebecca to help him outside one more time. She bundled him in blankets and supported his weight as they made their slow way to the porch. The sun was just beginning to paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, and the air was crisp and clean. "It is beautiful," Warren said, his voice thin and ready but still full of wonder. "Yes," Rebecca agreed, though she was looking at him rather than the sunrise. Warren turned to look at her, and his dark eyes held a lifetime of love. "Thank you," he said, "for everything. For being my wife, my partner, my best friend, for giving me a life worth living." "Thank you for saving me," Rebecca said, tears streaming down her face. "That night in the snow, you saved me in every way a person can be saved." "We saved each other," Warren said, echoing his words from so many years before. He reached up with a trembling hand and touched her face. "I am not afraid, Rebecca, because I know I have lived well, I have loved well, and I am leaving the world a better place than I found it because of you and our children." "I am not ready," Rebecca whispered. "I know," Warren said gently, "but you will be all right. You are the strongest person I know. You will carry on and you will remember me, and that is all I can ask." He died 3 days later, peacefully in his sleep with Rebecca's hand in his. She woke in the pre-dawn darkness to find him gone, and the sound of her grief echoed through the house, bringing the whole family running. They held her as she wept, all of them crying together, mourning the loss of the man who had been the cornerstone of their family. The funeral was well attended. Warren had been respected in the community, known as a fair man and a good neighbor. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, where he could watch over the land he had loved so much. Rebecca stood at the graveside, supported by her children, and she said her final goodbye to the love of her life. The weeks that followed were the hardest of Rebecca's life. The house felt empty without Warren, even with Robert and Emma and the grandchildren still there. She would turn to tell him something and remember he was gone. She would wake in the night and reach for him, only to find cold sheets beside her. But slowly, painfully, she learned to live with the grief. She told stories about Warren to anyone who would listen, keeping his memory alive. She spent time with her grandchildren, seeing Warren's features reflected in their faces. She continued to visit his grave on the hill, talking to him as if he could still hear her. And she remembered. She remembered the night in the snow, the cowboy who had broken down the door and taken her home. She remembered their first kiss, their wedding day, the birth of their children. She remembered the hard times and the good times, the laughter and the tears, the thousand small moments that had made up a life together. One evening, 2 years after Warren's death, Rebecca sat on the porch watching the sunset. She was 68 years old and her body ached constantly, but her spirit was at peace. She had lived a full life, a good life, exactly the kind of life she had come west to find. Rose had come to visit and sat beside her mother on the porch swing. "Are you all right, Mama? I miss him," Rebecca said honestly. "Every day, but I am all right. I had 40 years with your father, 40 years of love and partnership and family. Not everyone gets that. I am grateful for every moment we had." "He loved you so much," Rose said softly. "I know," Rebecca said. "And I loved him. That love, it does not end just because he is gone. It is still here, woven into everything around me. This house, this land, you and your brothers and all the grandchildren. Warren and I built something that will last. And that is a kind of immortality, is it not?" Rose rested her head on her mother's shoulder, and they sat together in comfortable silence as the sun sank below the horizon, and the stars began to appear. Rebecca lived for another 8 years after Warren's death. She watched more grandchildren grow and marry. She met her first great-grandchild, a boy who had Warren's dark hair and serious eyes. She continued to sew, though her hands were gnarled and painful, creating quilts for each new baby born into the family. She told her stories over and over, making sure that everyone knew where they had come from, how Rebecca and Warren had met, how they had built this life together from nothing but determination and love. She wanted the next generations to understand that good things did not come easy, that love required work and sacrifice and daily choice, but that it was worth it. Always worth it. On a winter morning just after her 76th birthday, Rebecca did not wake up. She died peacefully in her sleep, just as Warren had, and the family took comfort in knowing she had gone to join him. They buried her next to Warren on the hill, reuniting them in death as they had been in life. Years later, decades later, the story would still be told in Seligman. The story of the woman locked outside in the snow and the cowboy who broke down the door and took her home. It became a part of local legend, embellished and romanticized with each retelling. But the core truth remained unchanged. 2 people had found each other in a blizzard, against all odds. They had fallen in love. They had built a life together that had endured long after they were gone, leaving a legacy of family and love that rippled out through generations. And on cold winter nights, when the wind howled and the snow fell, people in Seligman would think of Rebecca and Warren, and they would be reminded that sometimes the worst storms bring the greatest blessings, and that love, real love, can save you in ways you never imagined possible. The ranch continued to prosper under Robert's management and eventually passed to his children and then to theirs. The house on the hill remained in the family, And every December, on the anniversary of that fateful night when Rebecca and Warren met, the family would gather for dinner. They would tell the story again, making sure the youngest members heard it and understood it. They would toast to Rebecca and Warren, to the love that had started it all, to the blizzard that had brought two souls together and created a legacy that would endure. And high on the hill overlooking the valley, two weathered headstones stood side by side, marking the resting places of Rebecca Carson Kane and Warren Kane. The inscriptions were simple but meaningful. On Rebecca's stone it read, "She came west seeking freedom and found love." On Warren's it read, "He broke down the door and built a home." Between them, carved into both stones, were the words, "Together always." The wind blew across the hilltop, carrying with it the scent of sage and juniper. The sun set over the valley in a blaze of orange and purple. The land endured, as it always had, as it always would. And somewhere in that vast expanse of earth and sky, the spirits of Rebecca and Warren Kane rested together, their love story complete, their legacy secured, their happily ever after achieved not in spite of the hardships they had faced but because of them, tempered and strengthened by every trial, every joy, every choice they had made to keep loving each other through it all. Their story became more than just a tale told on winter nights. It became a touchstone for the family, a reminder of where they had come from and what they valued. When times were hard, someone would invoke Rebecca's determination or Warren's steady strength. When love seemed difficult, someone would remind them that Rebecca and Warren had fought for their relationship every day for 40 years and never regretted it. When someone was afraid to take a risk, they would remember the young woman from Philadelphia who had come west alone and the Kansas farm boy who had struck out on his own, and they would find courage. The dress shop that Rebecca had owned and then sold to Sarah eventually passed to Sarah's daughter and then to her granddaughter. Each generation of seamstresses learned their craft in the same building where Rebecca had once measured and cut and stitched, and they all knew the story of the woman who had started it all. They took pride in continuing her legacy, in creating beautiful things with their hands just as she had. The boarding house where Rebecca had nearly died stood for many more decades before finally being torn down to make way for newer construction. But before it was demolished, someone salvaged the old front door, the one Warren had broken to save Rebecca's life. It was restored and hung in the local Historical Society Museum, with a plaque explaining its significance. Visitors would stand before it, reading the story, touching the wood that had once stood between life and death, and they would marvel at the way one moment, one choice, one man's decision to turn back in a storm had changed so many lives. In the Historical Society Museum, there was also a photograph of Rebecca and Warren, taken on their 25th wedding anniversary. They stood in front of their ranch house, surrounded by their children and grandchildren. Rebecca's hand was in Warren's, their fingers intertwined, and they were both smiling at the camera with the contentment of two people who knew they had found what they were looking for in life. Visitors to the museum would pause before this photograph, studying their faces, looking for clues to what had made their love so special, so enduring. But there was no secret, no magic formula. There was only the simple truth that they had chosen each other every day for 40 years. Through good times and bad, through sickness and health, through prosperity and hardship, they had chosen love. They had chosen partnership. They had chosen to build something together that was greater than either of them could have built alone.